Have you seen it?
See what?
My motivation for this year. I'm trying to find it. Hi everyone, my name is Ashley, and today I will be showing you how I practice the violin during winter break as an aspiring music major with a lot of college auditions next semester. Now, speaking from experience, I know it's really stressful when there's a lot of pieces to prepare, but you don't know how to divide your time. So today I will be showing you how I divide my practice schedule in a way that allows me to work on everything without burning myself out. So the first thing I do is write down all upcoming events and performances. This includes concerts, recitals, auditions, anything, even rehearsals. This way we know what pieces we need to prioritize practicing until then. Another thing that helps is the traffic light method. This means categorizing your repertoire in tiers of how performance-ready the piece is, with green being your likely performance-ready pieces that just need some review, yellow being your almost performance-ready pieces with some spots that need some careful practice, but you're getting the hang of it, and red being your working pieces that you've either just started or have a lot to work on slowly with the metronome, and it'll need some time and care before being considered to perform. I actually use the traffic light method when studying for school, and I find it to be very helpful even when you apply it to music practice. Once you have your priorities set, plan your days accordingly. That means don't reserve a whole day to practice on one single piece, but at the same time, don't try to squeeze everything into one day. But rather, work on 2 to 4 pieces per day and make a schedule and alternate. Next, very important, don't forget to properly warm up before practicing your repertoire. And a life hack that changed the way I practice: do not start with scales the first thing you do when you pick up your instrument. And let me tell you why. You may have heard that scales are the basic foundation of violin technique. So that being said, it would not be wise to build your technique on crusty, stale fingers. Instead, I warm up with the first 3 pages of Shadiak's School of Violin Techniques. It really helps to get the blood moving in my fingers, and I find that I can be relaxed in my hand. If my fingers still feel crusty afterwards, then I just play random pieces that I know until I feel completely warmed up and ready to practice scales. And no, scales are not boring. If scales are boring, that means the way you're practicing it is boring. I would suggest to spice it up and add some rhythms into your scales. I use the Barbara Barber book for scales, which is way less of a headache than the Carl Flesch book. I'd also throw in some double stops. And even harmonics. Basically, find ways to challenge yourself and do what works best for you. A tip that works for me when I practice scales and double stops is to alternate between block form scales and flying finger scales. I call it block form scales when your hand just stays in the same position throughout. That means like octaves, tenths, whereas flying finger scales, that includes normal scales, chromatic scales, broken thirds, anything that has your fingers like flying freely. And I think alternating between the 2 types of scales helps to reduce hand tension and lessens the chances of you getting hand pain when practicing. Then when it's time to practice your pieces, make sure you annotate your music well. That means everything is neat and legible, obviously, and preferably in multiple colors. Another thing you want to do is to write very specific notes, because if you're too vague, like, oh, I'll just remember what I was talking about, no, you won't. We're all human, we have human brains, we forget things. So that's why it's important to write it down very specifically. For instance, instead of just writing short, you could write something more descriptive, like staccato, spiccato, crisp, brushy, whatever. Like, what kind of short are you going for? I remember I was listening to a recording of the Shostakovich violin concerto, and I noticed the soloist was doing like this crisp Brook third movement style kind of stroke. So I wrote that down here. Also forgot to add that instead of writing soft or quiet, you can write shut up in big letters. I do that a lot in orchestra settings nowadays thanks to my stand partner last year. Next, make sure to take breaks. I'm sure you practice so earnestly, so hardworking. You deserve a reasonable break. Now, breaks within a practice schedule are subjective, and you should plan them in a way that suits your own practice needs, but I prefer doing 55-minute practice blocks with 5-minute breaks in between. And for longer practices, sometimes I occasionally throw in like a 15-minute break. The idea is, make sure your breaks are long enough to reduce tension and clear your mind for a little bit, but not too long that you lose motivation to get back on track right away. Also, a New Year's resolution of mine is to start practicing earlier in the day when the sun is still up. I tend to practice late at night because I'm a night owl. It's totally not 3 a.m. right now. But don't worry, I use a practice mute so my neighbors don't hear anything. Lastly, record your progress and make sure that you are improving slowly but steadily and you are moving towards your goals. Take notes on what you practiced that day and plan for the next day. It's also helpful to record yourself and listen back to it, as you might catch things in your playing that you did not catch before. And always keep track of what you did well and what you can improve on. I have an Instagram account for my practice diary, and it's been really helpful to document my practice as well as share it with fellow musicians who are also practicing too. I've linked my Instagram practice diary in the description below, and I'd really appreciate if you give it a follow. So yeah, that concludes this video. Feel free to comment down below if you have any questions or additional suggestions. Happy practicing and Happy New Year!